Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Parkinson's Podcast. Welcome to the Hear, Hear Parkinson's Podcast, where you will hear from special guests covering the world of Parkinson's with a deep dive on the World Parkinson Congress and a look at how the WPC has helped make extraordinary progress in the Parkinson's community by creating space for people with Parkinson's to have a seat at the table.
Hear, hear! You are listening to the third episode of the new podcast, Hear, Hear, Parkinson's Podcast, produced to make us all look forward to the next Congress in Phoenix in May 2026. Each episode we have a guest, which we want to introduce to you so that you get to know Central people better. This week we have Dr. Leonidas Stefanis from Greece as our guest. Welcome on board, Leonidas.
Thank you, Edgar. Thank you for this opportunity to address the WPC community.
You're welcome. Why don't you start out by doing a sort of short minute about yourself? I mean, your CV is very long and very impressive, especially to the lay people of us. I'm one. But could you do a short intro about yourself? Who is Leonidas?
I would describe myself as a physician scientist. Both my more basic research interests and the clinical side, the teaching side, are all revolving around Parkinson's disease. This is a central theme of what I do at all these levels. So I started by training in neurology in the States and did my postdoc there, working in a lab, doing research on more basic cellular aspects of Parkinson's. And then when I returned back to Greece, I combined more the clinical side with the research side, and increasingly I've been more involved on the clinical and teaching side, maybe a little bit less in basic research in recent years. But that's always my foundation.
Right. Why neurology?
Neurology sort of fascinated me. My father was a very eminent psychiatrist, and but at the time it wasn't. There was no such in Greece. There was no such division between neurology and psychiatry. So my father was trained both in neurology and psychiatry, and actually he trained at McGill under Penfield and Jasper. You know, in the era of the beginning of neurosciences approaching the brain. So he had a very good basic training in neurosciences. And it so turns out that, my brother became a very eminent psychiatrist and I became a neurologist. So we split neurology and psychiatry between us in the family. And of course, my father was a big influence, but also I was just interested in how the brain functions. And that was my initial, entry into neurology.
Right. Yeah. Reminds me of, I also spoke to a well-known neurologist in Norway, Kaja Nordengen. And she said that she decided already at age 9 to become a neurologist. And I said, could you actually spell the word neurologist at age of 9?
It wasn't as early for me. It was something that evolved over the years. And, in the last years of medical school, I knew what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Right.
I was interested in endocrinology also, but I thought, the endocrine system is really controlled by the brain. So better go to the source, study neurology.
Right. You are, as far as I've noted, you are chair of the program committee for the next Congress.
Right. It's a big honor, a great responsibility.
I was going to say great responsibility. How is it to bear responsibility on your shoulders?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, I've had great help from Eli and others like Roger Barker, and, to set things up. And the committees we have, generated, doing a great job. So I was very anxious in the beginning, but if anything, my anxiety is sort of dissipating as things move along rather smoothly, thanks largely to Eli. So it's a big responsibility, because the nature of the meeting, has so many stakeholders and trying to satisfy, kind of in brackets, everyone. But I think the core of it is great science and great communication. So I think we're going to be doing very well at those fronts.
Right. Is the program actually finished at this stage? We're speaking here. Of course, it's a podcast recording, which is supposed to have a long life, and we're not supposed to say exactly when we record, but let's say we're still more than a year out before the Congress. Is the program finished already, or is there still?
No, it's not finished, but it's, I would say it's 70, 80% there. And of course, we have to finalize it. And we're having a meeting actually next week to finalize it. And, within the next couple of months, send out the invitations to invited speakers. So I think we're at a good level, considering exactly that we're more than a year,
It's a great question, Edgar. It's funny, Edgar, because I'm literally sitting in the lobby where we're going to have the meeting with Dr. Stefanis and his team and all the program committee members next week, checking out the space. And it's a great question. And the timing, just so people know how complex it is, right? You put together this really complicated program because it is, like Dr. Leonidas said, so many different stakeholders. We need to send the invitations out 12 or 13 months ahead of time. And one of the reasons we do that is because generally the people we invite to speak at the Congress are so highly respected and regarded in the field that they get invitations a year out. If we don't invite them at least a year in advance, a lot of times they're already booked for other meetings. So that's how the world works when you have at that level of prestige with these presenters. So we'll start the finalize next week and get invitations out in April of 2025. So we'll have a program draft by the summertime. I just want to ask you, Leonidas, because you this is a big responsibility, and yet when we asked you, you very enthusiastically said yes, even though you knew it was a big task, because I think you've been at every single World Parkinson Congress, or maybe most.
No, I haven't been. I've been to most of them. I haven't been to Glasgow and haven't been to Kyoto, but I've been to all the others. Yeah, I was there at the first one, in Washington. And,
in 2006.
But it's sort of, I would say that for me, I don't know, the sort of more transformative meeting was the one in Portland for some reason. Well, where I really realized, I don't know, perhaps because at that time I was already more involved clinically with Parkinson's disease patients, and I started to see before I was more in my niche, of the basic research. But in that meeting, I sort of got a glimpse of this community feeling at the meeting and of the participation of the patients. There was a special participation about dance in Parkinson's, for example, from the Mark Morris dance group. And this was a dance group that I was following when I was in New York. I love to go to Brooklyn, right? And the same place. And my wife and I really enjoyed that group so much. And the fact that they were there, having a special program for patients with Parkinson's. And there were all these messages, coming from different directions, and this feeling of community and the presence of the patients and their caregivers. And that was the meeting where it really kind of gelled. And I really thought, and plus, it's always the basic science is so great also at this meeting, because it's kind of a niche within the meeting, and it's relatively, you get a chance to communicate with your colleagues much more in that kind of a niche. And so you get the feeling of the whole community, but at the same time, you get the feeling of great science. So I think it's a unique meeting. that respect. And so I was going to the meeting, but I sort of fell in love with the meeting, I think, in Portland, I would say. Yeah.
That's great news. Two things. One, you mentioned the Mark Morris Dance Company. Actually, at the time I was speaking, we are launching the Dance for PD program in Norway.
Oh, great.
In close cooperation with the National Opera and Ballet in Oslo. And they are highly regarded in their own respect, without having to look for people like us, but they've actually come into the cooperation, and they've said, yeah, we want to be a part of this.
Right.
So, I mean, it's an imported concept. It comes from Mark Morris in the United States, and the Norwegian Opera and Ballet didn't have to go with us, but they enthusiastically have come across and said, yeah, we want to work with you guys. And that is, I can hardly say how excited I am about that. And then drawing across to, as you said, the combination of what is happening at the Congress, both the people side and the academic side, and all those parts sort of coming together, all the stakeholders in the same room at the same time, whether they are people living with Parkinson's like myself, or doctors like you, or caregivers, or other medical people like physiotherapists, speech therapists, you name it. I think this is a unique concept as well.
Right. So you get, like I said, you get the feeling of the small group, and again of the community at the same time. So that's great.
So Leonidas, following on that, it's interesting that it was in Portland that things started to gel for you, because you were in DC and you also went to the Montreal meeting. Right? And so you'd been to two. This was the third Congress where it finally something impacted you. After Portland, was there something that you, like when you returned back to Greece, did you change? How have you changed? Like, how does it changed you as a physician scientist? I'm just curious, was there anything you sort of did differently, or how you speak about how you train future physician scientists? Have you changed how you educate and mentor them? Well, how did it impact you professionally, personally, in that way?
Well, first of all, I've urged my colleagues, and especially people from my team, to attend the other meetings. We were quite a large group. We went to Barcelona a couple of years back, and I guess it has also urged me to become more involved with the there's not as much the culture in Greece of patient actually active participation in research, or in even informing their own society. It's been kind of difficult. So I've been quite involved in helping them out more as much as I can, always keeping a distance, because they're the ones who have to do it. But I would say, for example, we started. It's not at the level you described, Edgar, but we do have someone doing their PhD. So he's he's actually a gymnast and physiotherapist who's been trained in the Dance for PD, and he's doing his PhD now with kind of a small clinical trial. With actually, he's adjusted the program to be with Greek music, so with Greek traditional music, and the patients love it, and it's very fulfilling, the whole endeavor. So it's some things have made myself and my colleagues, by extension, to be more involved with the patient community at large, and I guess be more empathetic in a way than we would otherwise.
I love that. I hope you're.
I think gradually we're And as I said, in recent years, I've been seeing more and more patients. Of course, our focus is these very rare genetic forms of Parkinson's that exist in Greece. But, we see a great variety of Parkinson's patients, also atypical Parkinson's syndromes. There, it's really, I have this feeling that we're not doing enough for them, I think we can do a lot for Parkinson's patients, but very little for patients with the atypical forms. So that's a big unmet need also, which is in the community at large, So that has to be taken into account. We're trying to participate, in clinical trials, but this hasn't yet happened to the extent that we would like to enroll people, at least for the hope of, a treatment, especially for the atypical forms. So all this has been much more in my mind, since you mentioned that, Eli, since that epiphany I experienced in Portland.
When you say atypical forms, it's like MSA and the other...
MSA and corticobasal syndrome and progressive supranuclear palsy. Those are the main ones, yeah.
Is there a higher prevalence, Leonidas, of atypical in Greece than other parts of the world?
No, I don't. Well, this hasn't been studied really to a great extent, and even Parkinson's disease has not been studied very well epidemiologically. But from the studies that have been done, it seems to be about the same level as in other countries for Parkinson's. There haven't been any studies on the prevalence of atypical.
Can you tell just a brief story, Leonidas, of the Contursi kindred for our listeners? Because not everyone knows about the Contursi kindred and your sort of the history. Are you able to tell a short story about how that came to and the impact of that on research?
Yeah, so a more general, history of that is that, in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s, there were some researchers, neurologists from New Jersey, Roger Duvoisin and Larry Gold, who kind of discovered these patients who were related. They were all Italian immigrants, and they came from this very specific area of southern Italy, this small village called, it's not a small village, but it's a village or a town, anyway, called Contursi. And they gradually, with the help of local physicians and neurologists, they were able to map out the gene responsible for this genetic form of Parkinson's disease. And this actually was the gene that controls the expression of alpha-synuclein, right? And it was called SNCA. And at the time, and they discovered this many years later. So like from the time they started studying, it took 10 years at the time to map the gene. And this was done actually by the lab of Bob Nussbaum at the NIH. And the postdoc in the lab, who was the first author of the science paper, published in 1997, was Greek, actually trained as a physician in Greece. His name is Michalis Polymeropoulos. And he knew from his studies in the University of Patras that there were some families that, a neurologist there, Thodoros Papapetropoulos, and a biologist called Aglaia Thansiadou had been working on these families and had identified them. And they had DNA samples from these families. And he thought, I'll ask them to also contribute to the study. And lo and behold, these families were actually related, which is not surprising, southwestern Greece and southern Italy. So these families actually came from the same original, mutation carrier, and they all had the same mutation in the alpha-synuclein gene. So this is the famous Contursi kindred. And actually, it's the beginning of the connection of alpha-synuclein to Parkinson's. Many people think that, they found it in Lewy bodies, but that's not true. That discovery actually happened afterwards. Once the gene was identified and the genetic defect, then Maria Grazia Spilantini and her colleagues identified the protein alpha-synuclein in Lewy bodies. And we know how impactful that discovery has been to the field of Parkinson's. The more famous is the recent kind of biomarker development. But there's also therapeutic developments targeting alpha-synuclein, which we hope will be available to patients in the next few years. So there's a tremendous discovery, starting from, these colleagues in New Jersey, and of course the families. That probably, it's interesting from a historical point of view also, because probably these families originated, in ancient times, before the immigration happened from, like 5th century BC or 6th century BC from the Peloponnese to southern Italy. So that's why you have branches of the family in both places. So it's kind of an amazing story from a historical
I
point
think it
of
is an
view.
amazing historical story. And I think it's important people hear it, because I think a lot of people, as they're diagnosed and they come in and they're newly diagnosed or they're new to the Parkinson's space, they don't always hear those historical stories from people like you who've been around long enough to actually know the story and know the people and tell the story. And I think it's, for me, always important for people to realize how long it takes from the discovery of one thing to have an impact and to expand. And that, like you said, I mean, it's a decade. Things move quickly, but they don't move that quickly. And I think it's important for people to know that.
Yeah, but the pace is accelerating, and hopefully, like we've discussed, Eli, especially for these families with the original genetic form of Parkinson's disease, it's quite severe form of Parkinson's. It strikes them at an early productive age, usually in the mid-40s, and they're quite debilitated within a few years. So I hope at some point, my major scientific kind of, I would say, not just scientific, but personal, goal would be to be able to bring something back to these families in terms of potential treatment targeting alpha-synuclein in the near future. Yeah.
Good. Leaving the scientific side for a moment, who is Leonidas in his spare time? Do you listen to music? You read books?
Yeah, I don't do those things. I mean, I do listen to music, but it's kind of a background while I'm working. It's not. But I love movies, and I love spending time with my family and friends, and those are things I do quite a lot. The theater I love. So we have. We have a group of friends here in Athens. My wife is actually from Barcelona. So another favorite activity is also, she has a very large family. She has 7 siblings.
Oh.
And so it's, so family life, which is quite broad, includes all the members of her family and their children and stuff. So every time, Christmas time we spend there, and also in the summers. There's very, very large tables at her family home. And so those are things I enjoy a lot. I haven't been reading as much, but recently. But I was just in Dublin, which enticed me to start reading The Dubliners. So that's the book the James Joyce book.
Yeah.
And I've read a few stories more. That's the reading I've done more recently, but it's not at the level I would like. Yeah, too much work. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
I was there actually. Tim Lynch, who's a great friend and colleague from my days at Columbia. He's a chair of neurology there in Dublin, University of Dublin. And he invited me and my wife. Actually, my wife is also a movement disorder specialist, but for children. And so we had a double kind of bill there. And it was really, really great to be there, and just the city, and just it really was very fascinating. We love traveling also, and with our children, we were recently in Japan. So that's another thing we like to do, travel with the family. But going back to the previous point, a great trip we've done actually is go to Naples and head south from Naples, about 2 hours from Naples, going south. There's this amazingly preserved, ancient site, which is called Paestum. In Greek, it's called Poseidonia, so it's the town of Neptune. And it's 3 magnificent monuments that are very well preserved from the 5th century BC. And can you guess what is the town just above it? The town above it is Konturzi. So this is the site. This is the site where, in ancient times, people from Greece migrated and established this community there, built these wonderful temples, and then they eventually moved up to the village of Konturzi, which is just half an hour up the mountains from Poseidonia.
Like a Mecca. It's like a Mecca. It was like Mecca.
It's like a Mecca. I've taken pictures. So at the WPC, I intend to show that picture of me in Paestum, Poseidonia.
Amazing.
So this is where it all started.
That is brilliant. I love that. So I have another question, just looking forward to the WPC and also just the future in general. What are you most excited about, Leonidas? Like, just what do you feel like we're just so close to answering a question or solving or creating something new? What gets you most excited about, like, Parkinson's right now, or atypical, just in the research in general? What are you most excited about?
Well, obviously, being I didn't mention this, but when I was at Columbia, just when that the science paper came out with alpha-synuclein gene being linked to Parkinson's, I started working in the lab on alpha-synuclein, working on cell models, then eventually moved also to animal models related to alpha-synuclein. Then coming back to Greece, I encountered these families. So I am biased, of course, but I have a strong belief that this is a central, piece of the puzzle for Parkinson's. And the fact that people are looking at this, intensively now, it's not just about these rare families. Most people with Parkinson's disease, we knew this, but now we have this biomarker which really shows it, to a very obvious degree that they have alpha-synuclein pathology, and this happens very early in the disease process. And I think finding out exactly how the disease starts. This is something we're looking at now in asymptomatic carriers of this mutation in our population. But finding the first hints that the disease process is starting, I think that's a major area of research. And obviously all the more basic biology, how does this lead to the disease? How does this lead to neuronal dysfunction and the symptoms in patients? So I think, identifying this pathway and targeting it, I think that's I think the big thing for the next few years related to alpha-synuclein. So, but I'm biased, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. I hopefully we have a lot of great posters and abstracts at the WPC next year in 2026 around this topic. I agree. I think there's a lot going on. And for anyone listening, if you're doing research in this space, be sure to submit an abstract, because we'd love to have a presentation on the work that you're doing.
Right. We didn't talk about the abstracts. We talked about the talks and everything being prepared for the meeting, but we haven't even put up the announcement for the abstracts yet. So that's also a task of the committee. Yeah.
Yep, and that'll open up this summer. So it'll be in August when we open. But yeah, excited to see the research that comes in. It's always a really exciting part of the Congress. Sorry, Edgar, you have a question on the tip of your tongue. I can see it.
Yeah, I do. We're nearing the end of this episode. It has been great to have you as our weekly guest, Leonidas. We tend to have an what do you call the exit question, and that is if you're riding the elevator and it stops between two floors for some reason, who would you want to be stuck with?
Anyone, living or dead. You get
living or dead. Use your
living or dead. I would say again. I'm family centered, so I would say my members of my family, my wife, my children. That's what I would say. It's very boring.
Excellent.
But not
great answer.
Not Mahatma Gandhi, for example.
Not Mahatma.
I love it. I think that's wonderful. I think that's a perfect answer.
Yeah. There was one of the major newspapers in Norway had this kind of question running for a similar type of short interview with people and then in the end. Almost every second guest said the elevator repairman.
Okay, that's more practical. Yes, that's more practical.
But I think family
that's
wins.
Pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah. Good. I think that was all for today, Leonidas. Thank you for being available here. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting you in person in Phoenix a good year from now.
Thanks. Great.
Thank you, Edgar,
interview.
for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Here Parkinson's podcast. If you would like to experience the next World Parkinson Congress for yourself, to feel and see the change in real time, save the date to join us from May 24th to the 27th, 2026 in Phoenix, Arizona. Learn more at WPC2026.org. This podcast series is made possible with support from BlueRock Therapeutics.